live long and prosper. So in this video series, I'm going to be talking through the social justice elements of every episode of the original series of Star Trek. The thing that inspired this project was actually a Fox News article which argued that Star Trek has in some way betrayed its traditional commitment to sort of political neutrality or middle ground by embracing progressive politics. In this series, we're going to see that Star Trek has always embraced progressive politics, and it's always been aspirational for social justice in various senses. I am taking a broad perspective on social justice here, so that may include multiple different types of social justice, whether that's racial, whether that's economic, whether that's religious, whether that's abilities, gender and sexuality, anything broadly considered. I will go through every episode. Some of the episodes I will interview fellow Trekkies and talk with them about it. And then below, in the descriptions, I will give you additional information about the episodes, particularly their original air date, who wrote the screenplay, and who directed that episode. I also want to dedicate this series to my dad, Michael Allen Zapkin. He was an OG Trekkie from back in the day, and it was watching the original series with him that I came to love Star Trek. In this video, we're going to talk about the first episode of Star Trek proper, after the pilot episode, The Cage, which was never actually aired on TV until the 80s. And that first episode is called The Man Trap. Sorry about the camera bobbling. My cat, Frank, was on the stand behind it and knocked it as he was leaping to the ground. Anyway, The Man Trap. So this is an episode that sees Kirk, McCoy, and random crew member, not a red shirt, interestingly enough, blue shirt, interestingly enough, despite the stereotype that red shirts always beam down and die. Kirk, McCoy, and random crew member go down to this planet. They have to do medical checkup on this doctor and his wife, Nancy. Nancy happens to be Dr. McCoy's one true love from his past, etc., etc. They go down. Interestingly enough, all three men, when they first see Nancy, see a different woman. Kirk sees a woman, I don't know, in her late 40s, early 50s, maybe? I don't know. Decent amount of gray hair. Not old, but, not hardly a girl of 25, as Kirk later puts it, when McCoy says she looks exactly the same as she did when she was 25. Because McCoy sees her very much looking like a young woman, the woman that he remembers from his past. Other random crew member sees a completely different woman. Sees a blonde that he had known on Rigel's Pleasure Planet, a planet about which we unfortunately never hear anything else in the future, because there's a lot of potential, I think, with Rigel's Pleasure Planet. But, so they all see different women. Random crew member goes outside, some stuff happens, he's dead. What the hell happened to him? He's got all splotchy face now. Nobody knows what's going on. Nancy, who found the body, was like, oh, he ate this poisonous plant. And Spock is like, I've analyzed that plant. I can tell you exactly what it is, and it doesn't cause weird face splotches. That happens later. Spock's not down on the planet. Spock stays on the ship the whole time. Or not the whole time. He stays on the ship initially. McCoy takes the body back up, examines the body, and he's like, yeah, there's no poison from that plant in this guy's body. So, now we're confused. Kirk's suspicions are aroused, and he immediately has decided that this was a violent death, even though there's nothing particularly to prove that at this stage. So they go back down with some more crew members. Those two random crew members end up getting killed. We find out that Nancy is somehow involved, because Nancy is not Nancy. Ooh, spooky. And we have that pretty conclusively proved when Nancy transforms into Crewman Green, who's now dead on the planet, and beams back up. So it turns out that Nancy is the last of the salt vampires who live on this planet. And when that salt vampire killed the actual Nancy about a year earlier, Nancy and the archaeologist developed a kind of mutually beneficial relationship where he would supply the salt vampire with salt, and in exchange, the salt vampire would basically live as Nancy. So the problem comes when the salt vampire gets up on the ship and is trying to get salt, trying to extract salt from the crew, which the salt vampire can do, hence the vampire part. So a couple of random crew members are dead. Then McCoy is all like, no, it's Nancy. I love Nancy, even though I know it's not Nancy and I know it's a salt vampire. And the salt vampire eventually tries to kill Kirk, and McCoy has to decide, am I going to get over the illusion of this being Nancy, even though I know it's a salt vampire, and shoot this salt vampire to save Captain Kirk, etc., etc. And so you have that climactic element there, that personal conflict for McCoy, rooted in his mistaken feelings that this is somehow Nancy, even though obviously it's a salt vampire. Now, what's the social justice element of this? The social justice element in the man trap is largely an ecological one. And this is overtly discussed in the episode. There is a comparison with the bison or the American buffalo. There's a comparison with I think it's the dodo is the other thing that they compare it to. We learn from the archaeologists that once there were massive herds of salt vampires roaming this planet. Now there's one. It's Doctor Who. It's the last Time Lord, if the last Time Lord was a salt vampire. So that's a very overt sort of ecological comparison. Sorry, Frank is screaming. I don't know how much that's going to come through on the audio for this video. But that's a very overt ecological theme within this episode. And actually, in 1966, when this episode came out, there definitely were environmental concerns. The environmental movement did really take off in the 1960s, but looking back at it from the perspective of 2022, where we know that we're very, very close to massive ecological catastrophe caused by human activity, or at least in large part by human activity, I mean, we are on the cusp of, if not in the early stages of, probably the next great extinction event. Now, in the man trap, it seems that the salt vampires just used up all of the salt that was naturally occurring on this planet and basically starved to death in mass numbers. In our contemporary situation, human activity is actually playing a very, very significant role, and the science is conclusive on this, that is going to lead to the deaths of massive numbers of species on this planet. So there's an ecological component to it. There's also the related element to this is a resource extraction component, because again, the salt vampires used up all of the salt. That is a naturally occurring non-renewable resource that they depended on for survival. That's a huge problem. When your species, or maybe in our case your society, your civilization, is dependent on continual mass use of a non-renewable resource, like oil, like coal, like natural gas, etc., etc., you burn through those things. You're welcome for that pun, by the way. But you go through non-renewable resources sometimes very, very quickly, and if you are dependent on the existence of those non-renewable resources, once they're gone, you have a big problem. I mean, for us, the end of oil supplies, the end of coal supplies, natural gas supplies, will either force us to convert to renewable energy, which we should be doing more of anyway, particularly in the US, where we have the money to do it. We just don't have the political will. But that's beside the point. But you either have to find some kind of alternative. Either you develop an alternative, or you perish. I mean, the salt vampires, the only alternative that they are able to get is to absorb the salt from other living creatures. But when you kill off all of the other living creatures on the planet, still no salt. So, I mean, it literally leads to the extinction of this species because they weren't able to manage their resources effectively. Whether or not there was a possibility of them managing those salt resources is something we just don't have enough information in the episode to determine. But we clearly have that as a theme here. This problem of resource extraction and the detrimental consequences that can come with not carefully managing, particularly non-renewable resources, and how that can lead to ecological and biodiversity catastrophe.